Baby Boomer fans, we are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River, make sure you are wide awake, and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Greetings, everyone. This is going to be a great fun chat for you. We hope, anyway. It certainly is a memorable fun chat for Jackie and me and for our guest as well, because what happened 71 years ago on our farm in Bismarck is we're memorializing it, you might say, in this conversation. Wouldn't that be correct, Jackie?
Correct. So welcome, everyone, and we do want you to take note of the purple banner below. Please go to www.whilethewindmillwatch.com. There you'll find all sorts of information about the authors, about where we might be signing books, about our vendors, events, and also the 1950s Fun Chat, which you are viewing right now. In the upper right-hand corner is that book that spurred and kicked off the Fun Chat, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s. And if you're interested in checking it out, well, go to the vendors portion of our website and you'll be able to find all sorts of sources for this book. But right now we're going to get going and start. The topic of this chat is the tale of two U.S. Air Force jet crashes and how they are related to our guest, Scott Nelson, and to us, the Pfeiffer sisters. Scott operates a third-generation farm ranch, which was homesteaded by his grandparents in 1908 after they emigrated from Sweden. The property is located just north of the Cannonball River and Standing Rock Indian Reservation in southern North Dakota. Beyond the farm and ranch life, Scott is interested in history, World War II aviation, and artwork. He also enjoys writing and contributes to a column to a local magazine. Occasionally, Scott's writing can be found in North Dakota Datebooks for Prairie Public Radio. So, Scott, we welcome you to this 1950s Fun Chat.
Hi, Scott.
Well, good morning.
Good morning,
Jackie.
Yes. We begin our chat with a question for our viewers, which is an unusual way. Here's the question, viewers. Why are Scott and the Pfeiffer sisters connected by two U.S. Air Force jet tragedies that occurred 9 years apart and decades ago? June 12, 1954 will be the 71st anniversary of the Air Force jet crashing in our flax field, 10 miles east of Bismarck, north of Menoken. It was on December 19th in 1963 that an Air Force jet crashed on Scott's family farm. So we have an unusual bond. So, Scott, thanks to your curiosity, you found us through an internet research. So what caused you to contact us about the crash, which highly impacted 4-year-old Janine and me, 7-year-old Jackie?
Well, I was looking for something. I don't remember what the heck it was. But you kind of, when you're looking for things, you kind of go down a rabbit hole and you end up someplace where you didn't realize you'd get to. But I was looking for something and I came across, it was called Presbyterian Manor Newsletter, and it had in there a pilot that was living there. He was, up in age, and he talked about bailing out of an airplane when his engine went out over Bismarck, North Dakota. And it was what set it apart was the highest survived bailout at the time. It was about 7 miles high. And so I started researching, and I could not find anything. I couldn't find much on this man, Arnold. I believe it was Arnold Weber.
Yes.
And I looked, and well, here this book popped up, While the Windmill Watched, and there was a part in there that mentions the crash.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so I looked around. I think I tried to contact you guys. I never got anything back. And then later on, I tried again. Well, maybe I got the right email or something, and I got you guys. and you provided a lot of information. Well, Jack, you sent me a Bismarck Tribune article that was, I think it came out the next day, I think June 13th of 54. And there was a lot in there. Well, I do date books, and I thought this would make a good date book. And that's why I was looking for all this information. And well, that article really provided, because it had the guy that helped him when he finally came down. And but he had bailed out over Bismarck. His engine went out, and he parachuted, and a strong west wind had blown him toward the east. So he didn't actually come down until he got way out on the other side of Sterling, I believe. And this guy, helped him, and so that all that information was put together, and I've got a date book coming out here on the 12th with Prairie Public. But yeah, I contacted, if it wasn't for you gals, a lot of that stuff I wouldn't have known about, because I couldn't find much about him. And
well, Jackie, can you tell us a little bit about what we wrote in the book about that plane crash and how we felt?
And this is just a summary of it, because on page 212 in While the Windmill Watched begins a 4-page notation, or maybe more than notation, of this tragic. And it was a Saturday afternoon after our noon meal on June 12th, 1954. And Janine and I were playing paper dolls in her bedroom. And I remember looking out the south-facing window and spotting a plane flying so low that I thought it might crash into the treetops of our shelter belt. Well, seconds later, a loud boom shook the house. Well, it was Dad's habit to, after eating lunch, to lie down on the cool kitchen floor for a quick nap. So this noise, of course, awakened him, and he ran out of the house, and he flung open the garage doors, and he hopped on the Farmall M tractor, and then he headed for this plume of black smoke that was being emitted from our flax field on the other side of that shelter belt. Well, Mom sprinted after him, and she shouted to me, "Stay there, take care of your little sister." Well, at age 7, I was in no emotional shape to do that. I was scared, and I wanted safety of my mom. And of course, Janine was scared too. Your turn, Janine. How did you feel?
Well, as a 3, almost 4-year-old little girl, Scott, I can remember it vividly, what happened, and playing paper dolls, and that boom, and the sudden noise in the kitchen of Dad getting up off the floor in a hurry, and Mom probably, as she was doing the dishes from our noon meal, she maybe some things went crashing around in the kitchen too. But we were all frightened about what could have happened, or what did happen. And then, as Jackie explained, Mom and Dad went out and got themselves out to the field. And that particular field was not too far from our house. I'm not good at approximating distances, but it was close enough that Jackie and I could run out there. But the thing that I remember, Scott, is because I was a little girl, that there were so many cars driving up our driveway. And of course, that just rolled up the dust from underneath those tires as those cars came in. And I was about the height of the top of the wheel of the car. And so I remember thinking at the time, I hope I don't get run over by these cars, because I can't really see where I'm running. So fortunately, when I got out to Mom, I grabbed her leg and hung on, because of course I was in the habit of doing that anyway, Mom. And it was amazing how many people, some who had followed that low flying plane to where it crashed into our field. And then of course, that was before the interstate, and US Highway 10 was the main east-west road highway for us. Our farm was located 1.5 miles north of that. So we got a lot of visitors on our farm just out of curiosity to see what had happened. I imagine too, Scott, that people were wondering, as we were at the time, where was the pilot?
Mm-hmm.
No one knew about him.
No.
And so I can't even tell you when it was finally determined that the pilot had bailed out safely before the plane crashed into our field.
Well, and can you imagine if that plane, if it was course was a little different, and if it had crashed right into your house, and you could have wiped out your whole family.
Yes.
Oh, more than that, right? It was terrible, and so Dad ended up with a big hole in his field, and then for several weeks, there was a lot of security around our place. Guards there's a guard at our road as the lane comes up to the house, and around the back part of the section line. This was a section we lived on, so there were guards all around that. And then they finally dug down somehow and took the engine out, and all of the shrapnel sort of that was left. It was kind of a chartreuse, lime green and silver. And so many years after that, when Dad was plowing in that area, he would plow up some of that metal. It just, the earth just moved it up, and so that was. Today, still, you can see a little divot in the field where it was.
I'm sure today you still could find pieces if you really looked. Like if you took a metal detector.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting after you had contacted us, Scott, that we really hadn't thought much about the plane crash since that time. It was just something that happened to us during our childhood, and then life went on. But I got to thinking about the pilot, Arnold Weber. He was from Potwin, Kansas, which is southeast Kansas. And I wondered if he was still alive. He could have still been alive even this day, depending on his age. Well, when you had told us about that article in that Presbyterian Manor newsletter, at that time he lived there in 2023. Of course, here it's 2025, and is the gentleman still alive? And I did some research and sleuthed. That's kind of part of the fun about even getting guests for our fun chat, is that we have to sleuth, and we have to do some detective work as far as in getting information. So I talked to the Chamber of Commerce in El Dorado, Kansas, and they referred me to more over to the Potwin area of Kansas. And it was just interesting how people there did some research and sent that to me as far as if he was alive or not, and who were his family members. How can I reach them? So I was able to visit with a daughter of his. He had passed away more recently, but this particular daughter had been his caretaker for a number of months. So it was very interesting to learn something about his career, because he did make his career Air Force and piloting, and he went on along with other Air Force flyers to make history with the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular plane,
when he bailed out.
Go ahead, Scott.
Sorry, should I talk?
Yeah, please.
When he bailed out, he was a brand new second lieutenant. Okay. And he had just been in the Air Force for several years. And of course, you had mentioned that he set the record for the highest survived bailout at the time, in history. Of course, it was surpassed after that. But he went on, I think he served 23 years in the Air Force. I think he retired a major, high ranking in the Air Force. And he got, I think it was Distinguished Flying Cross for missions he flew in Vietnam. And he also set a record of, I think it was 10,000 miles in an F-4 Phantom jet that took 18 hours. And so there was quite a bit of history, and I wouldn't have known that, but they had some articles in that Presbyterian Manor newsletter, and otherwise I wouldn't have found that stuff out. So, but
Well, when I
real interesting.
When I think of how he had ejected, and the reason he knew to eject was because there was another jet flying on his wing, or was his wingman? Is that correct?
Wingman, yes, yep.
Yeah, and that particular pilot said, "You got a fire back behind there. I think you better get out of there." And so he did. But at 35,000 feet, there's no hardly any oxygen. So he said, he was smart enough, of course. He said, "I held my breath when I ejected, and I got down to what ended up being about
15,000 feet is when he opened the chute."
Yep, and then he breathed, and he lived to tell about it.
How terrified he must have been.
If you would open the chute right away, which some people might have done, it would have taken him a long time, and he didn't have oxygen with him. Yeah. And, he could have died of oxygen, lack of oxygen, and maybe that's why they weren't survived, that high when they bailed out.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think we need to make mention too of the gentleman from Bismarck. His name was Joseph Swartz, who followed on Highway 10, followed along with this low-flying jet.
Well, he followed the parachute.
Okay.
He saw the parachute coming down, and the wind was really blowing from the west and kept pushing him east, but he kept descending, and he kind of paced his vehicle with this parachute coming down. And then when it finally landed on the other side of Steele, a couple miles east of Steele, or Sterling, I should say.
Okay.
He landed in a plow field, and he stopped his vehicle quickly and helped collapse the chute, because the chute was pulling this poor pilot along the plowed field.
Yeah, because of the wind.
Arnold said if he wouldn't have clapped his chute for him, he'd still been out there getting blown down that field.
Well, I often wondered about this gentleman who flew the plane, and what a blessing that he was able to get out of it and land safely. But and now as an adult, I think back, and of course, the older we get, at least for me, the more interesting things of the past become. And so thinking, it would have been really cool to have met this pilot, even though we were little, for our family to have met him. But who knows what security was. And I believe there was a jet then that was sent up from Ellsworth Air Force Base to Bismarck to pick him up and take him up.
This guy that picked him up, he took him back to the Bismarck airport, and then Ellsworth sent up a C-47 cargo plane up to get him. Yep.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the ejection process and how that changed something in the Air Force.
Well, this Arnold, when he ejected, it worked, and I believe they had a ejection seat on those. His plane was an F-86D, I believe, and that was the same kind of planes that they used in Korea. And I should have researched that more, but it got him out, and he survived. But later on, there was the F-106 Delta Dart that had a defective ejection seat. And then, I don't know how you want to go into this, but there was a crash down by us. It wasn't on our farm, but it was about 10 miles away. And that was more tragic because the pilot was killed. And
that had to do with the ejection gone wrong?
Right.
Failed?
Yeah, that was, I was just a couple months old because I was born in October 63. And this was in December. And a jet this was out of Minot. And the reason this fighter squadron was nicknamed the Spittin' Kittens. And they flew 106 Delta Darts. And what they were up there for is, the Cold War was going on.
Sure.
And if it got hot, there would be Russian bombers coming over the Arctic Circle to attack the North Dakota air bases and stuff. And these planes, their job was to intercept those bombers should war break out. And they were training that morning, very, very cold morning, 20 below.
Ooh.
But they took off from Minot and they were practicing interceptions. They'd use each other's, they'd break up and then they'd use each other as targets. And this plane, the guy's name was William Richardson, Captain William Richardson. And something happened to his plane, and it peeled off from the others, and they could not contact him, and they lost radar contact, and it crashed down here about 10 miles west of us between Flasher and Raleigh that morning. And my dad, I guess I was there too. I was just a baby, but my mom and dad were in Flasher. And the siren went off in Flasher, and a big cloud of smoke boiled up to the west. Well, they drove out there, and they got there. Well, one of the first. There was other people there, but it was before it was cordoned off. There was a big hole in the ground and just pieces of airplane. And unfortunately, this pilot was, and the reason that he had went down with the plane is his ejection seat failed, and he was the 13th pilot killed because of that ejection seat.
Whoa.
Wow. I'm amazed they allowed that to go on that long.
Well, yeah. And, that was the last straw finally, because this Captain Richardson's good friend, and he was the squadron commander, his name was Jack Brewington. He grounded the whole squadron in Minot and then did a nose to tail evaluation of each plane and demanded that ejection seat be changed. And he almost lost his commission over it. I mean, he went down and met with and people, these generals and stuff of the Air Force were not happy that he'd grounded his whole squadron. And finally, he went down and he actually took an ejection seat with him. And the ejection seat was made by Hughes Aircraft. And they had a technician from Hughes Aircraft saying, there's nothing wrong with this ejection seat. It was just error of the pilot, not getting it to work right. Well, he put a demonstration on. He put the ejection seat up on the table and then had somebody sit in it and demonstrated, because the thing would not fire when you pulled the handles. And then they had a secondary strap on the floor of the plane that you'd have to pull to get it to, when they were all suited up and belted in, they could not reach this. And he demonstrated that, it just couldn't be done. And finally, they did change. They pulled out all the ejection seats in that Delta Dart. And finally, they had one that worked. And it saved many pilots after that. But
did Hughes...
Go ahead.
Excuse me. Did Hughes Aircraft then refabricate, that, or did they choose some other aircraft?
I don't know who ended up making it. I know the original was had a ballistic charge that shot the seat out of the plane, and the one they got was a rocket catapult that was way more reliable.
Interesting.
But I never looked into who manufactured, if it was Hughes that redid it or if it was another company. When
the pilots eject, do they go? I mean, I lack knowledge about this. Do they go up? Does the top of the cover of the plane go off, or do they go down, or how do they get out of the plane? How are they ejected?
When they're flying at a very high speed, they can't. Used to be you jump out, Well, these high-speed planes, you cannot. Sometimes they're going, near the speed of sound,
Ooh.
and you cannot just climb out and jump out.
Yeah.
So they designed a seat. Well, the canopy would fly off, and then the seat would get blown out of the airplane.
Oh.
And then I guess they'd separate from the seat then, and it was all, that they did all automatically. And I think many times, I think the later ones, it would, the chute would deploy automatically when it got down to a height where, they could breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the pilot might be, incapacitated.
Right.
And so, it was a lot different from like World War II, where they just jumped out of the airplanes. Yeah, these ejection seats was with these high speed, high altitude planes. They needed that.
Scott, tell us where the crash that occurred close to your area. Has there been a memorializing of that event?
Well, there again, I knew this story, and I wrote a Dakota Datebook on it. Mm-hmm. And it went out, it aired, I think it was on the date, can't remember if it was the date of the crash or the birth date of Captain Richardson. I can't remember, but I think it was about a year later, I got an email, and it was the nephew of Captain Richardson's. It was a nephew. He was a district judge down in Texas, and he was looking for information on his uncle, Googling, and he found my date book. Mm-hmm. Well, that turned into, because, this happened in 1963, and it was big news back then.
Oh, sure.
But, people have forgotten. Mm-hmm. And the people that were around at that time remember it. And some remember there was a plane crash, and some can't remember what kind of plane it was. Some think it was like World War II vintage and stuff like that. And I'm in the Legion, Flasher Legion Post 69 here. And I brought it up to our Legion members, and I said, we should put a memorial out there. Mm-hmm. So people don't forget.
Yeah.
And so we decided we put up a memorial, and then I got this nephew of Captain Richardson. He got me in contact with Captain Richardson's daughter, Trish Healy. And we were communicating, and she says, I would like to come up someday. And, she'd never been to the place where the crash happened, but she said, I'd like to see it. She was only 2 years old when her dad was killed, so she doesn't remember him. But they ended up coming up, her and her husband and then this district judge, they came up, and I think maybe there were some other family members, but they came up, and I got a dog that wants to go out. Hey, Levi, let Rusty out. He's over here grumbling. He shouldn't be in here.
That sounds like Rusty's a good boy.
But anyway, she came up, and then we put on a big a deal for her. Why? The people that owned the land, I had. It's changed owners now, but the ones that were there at the time, I had the one guy take her out and show them the actual spot that it crashed. And, there's still pieces of it being found, if you go out, and
did they have any memorabilia from the crash? Was anything presented to them, coins or plane pieces?
Well, my dad, when he went out there, he picked up a piece of it, and it was like a piece of piping, an elbow or something
of the plane.
And a lot of other people picked up stuff after it happened. They cordoned it off, and I guess Air Force spent several weeks there cleaning it up. But after they were done, there was still a lot of stuff there. And over the years, people have found stuff. People would go up there and they'd look around and they'd pick up pieces of it. So there was people around Flasher and Raleigh had collections, boxes of pieces. And some people said, well, we used to have it around. I don't know what happened to it. They must have got thrown out.
Well, that's awesome.
So the farmer or the owner of that land had to allow them to go on that, wouldn't it?
Well, they had. Well, are you're talking about the people that would go find pieces and that?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I suppose, you know, or people would just drive in there and you know, look around. As long as they weren't hunting and stuff, I suppose. But
tell us where this memorial to the pilot who perished in that crash. Tell us where it's located in North Dakota. And
well, it'd be north of Raleigh, North Dakota. It's Raleigh, North Dakota, not Raleigh. I think it's South Carolina.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes they get, when they send mail back and forth, they get letters from South Carolina. But yeah, it's north of Raleigh, North Dakota, along Highway 31.
Okay.
Several miles north. So.
Okay, so if people wanted to find it, if they were on a mission, they could find that as if they traveled on Highway 31.
Well, and it's not real pronounced. I mean, it's not real big, and so you really have to pay attention. And I know people have looked for it and they drive back and forth and can't find it. You know, they know.
Do you know, Scott, have there been many crashes of Air Force planes in the state of North Dakota, or many pilot loss that occurred right in North Dakota?
Well, I know there was several 106 Delta Darts that crashed, and I think there was some pilots lost, and you know, some were, you know, some survived. I think there was one up in Lake Sakakawea, you know, for many years. I think when the water was down, they finally were able to retrieve that aircraft.
Wow.
But yeah, there was stuff, you know, and I don't know, back in World War II, I suppose there was stuff. Well, back in World War II, I know a B-17 crashed up by Minot that was coming in. And that was also from South Dakota. And they were on a training flight and they tried to land, and it was so foggy and rainy that they missed the airport and crashed into a hill up by Minot. So I know there was other ones that happened, you know, that.
Yes. I think in our conversation before in preparing for this chat that you had mentioned how you spoken to AMVETS groups in Minot. Is that correct, or other AMVETS groups?
Well, I belong to. I've done paintings about World War II aviation, and I donated the paintings, the original paintings, up at the Minot Air Museum, and they invite me up to their meetings, and I was up there to the meeting just a couple weeks ago, and I told them about this crash at Bismarck and the significance of it. And nobody, and these were all pilots and stuff, and nobody had ever heard of it. You know, it was just kind of lost to history.
Yeah.
You know, Scott, at the time, it was a big thing, but you know, people just forget. And you know, if it's not written down, and like when I was doing research and trying to look for information on, there's just nothing out there. You know, and I did find some Air Force records that. And I think I found the serial number of the plane, and it just mentions it crashed up by Bismarck, you know, and that's pretty much all it was.
So, Scott, do you happen to have any of your drawings or any of your artwork or your artwork within reach right now?
Really not. I didn't think of bringing anything out, but
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't think of mentioning it.
If you go on scottnelsonart.com, you know, there's some stuff there. I don't keep that up very good, but.
No.
Well, there's a lot of veteran stories on that, which is way better than the paintings. So.
Oh, but those pen and ink drawings, so meticulous. And by the way, folks, he's self-taught. You'll just be amazed when you take a look at those.
Yes, scottnelsonart.com. Nelson, correct?
Right. Yep.
That's
okay.
Swedish.
And you had mentioned about that the plane crash. We noted as our plane crash and your plane crash. Our plane crash was kind of lost in time, and without you having you contact us about this story and wanting to know more about it, it would have continued to been lost in time, other than what we have written in our book. And
Right.
so we're very grateful that you brought this up, and
Yes.
we anticipate that there will be more in the news in the Bismarck area closer to the anniversary date of the crash on June 12th of this year.
Mhm.
So we're grateful for that, because there is a lot of history there, and we're in it, even though it may have been forgotten, we're bringing it to the forefront again of something that was certainly very pivotal in the lives of Jackie and me and our parents and the Menoken community on that date in 1954. Scott, we thank you so much for being our guest today. It's been a pleasure to hear your story about the plane Air Force jet that crashed in your area in 1963. And we take delight in honoring Captain Arnold Weber, who was the pilot of the Air Force jet that crashed in our field. Two different total endings, but
Right.
to those
Yeah,
gentlemen.
one pretty tragic, and one, was just lost the airplane, which that plane would have got lost anyway when they were done with it. They would have tore it apart anyway. So, but yeah, it's real tragic when a man is lost.
Yeah.
And folks, too, if you have opportunity to go to Prairie Public Radio to the Dakota Datebook program on this Thursday, I think it's Thursday, June 12th, that's when that Dakota Datebook will run. Is that correct? About our plane crash?
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
They have it run several times a day, but you can also go on their website and get it, on that day too. So
wonderful. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
And viewers, tell everyone you meet about the 1950s Fun Chat, even your relatives. So until next time, toodaloo.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you.
Okay.
Bye.